Is that her?
They say heartbreak feels the same for everyone, but they're wrong. Some heartbreaks don't just split you open. They remind you that the world still measures your worth by shades you never chose.
You're incredible, but my family wouldn't understand.
My name is Brianna Cole, and I learned that lesson the night the man I loved said I wasn't his type. Not because I wasn't kind enough, not because I didn't fit his plans, but because I was black. The words came quietly, the way storms often do before they break something. We were parked outside a small Italian restaurant in downtown Sydney, the kind with soft lights and wine bottles stacked like promises. I was laughing at something he said about his coworkers when the silence fell between us like a curtain. He turned toward me, hands still on the steering wheel, knuckles pale against the leather. "Bree," he began, and I felt it before he said it. That cold tightening in my chest, that warning that love was about to hurt in a way I couldn't fix. "I don't think we can keep doing this," Nathan said. His voice trembled, but his eyes stayed fixed on the dashboard. I asked him why, already knowing the answer. He inhaled, sharp and shallow. "You're incredible, you know that. But my family, they just wouldn't understand." "Understand what?" The question clawed at the back of my throat. But I didn't ask because I knew. I had seen the signs, his hesitation to hold my hand when we passed certain people, the way he tensed when the subject of family dinners came up, the nights he'd brush off my questions with a joke and a kiss. He had been practicing this goodbye long before tonight. "It's just easier," he said finally. Easier. The word stung worse than the reason. Easier to walk away than to stand up. Easier to love in private than to be seen in public. Easier to break me than disappoint them. I turned my face to the window so he wouldn't see the tears rising. I had given him laughter, trust, time, softness, and in return, he gave me the reminder that sometimes love bends beneath prejudice. He dropped me at my apartment like it was an errand. I didn't look back. Inside, the quiet felt cruel. My reflection in the hallway mirror didn't look like me. It looked like someone who had been told she was too much for the life she wanted. I leaned against the door and let the sobs come raw, heavy, unstoppable. I wasn't crying for him. I was crying for the version of myself that still believed being good, being loyal, being loving could protect me from racism. For days I moved through life like I was underwater. Work emails blurred, my coffee tasted like cardboard, and every noise outside felt like the world reminding me it hadn't stopped just because I had. I kept hearing that word type as if it had been branded onto me. I'd see couples on the street, white hands laced together, laughing freely, and wonder if I had been foolish to think I could belong in that picture. I wanted to be angry, but anger required energy I didn't have. So I stayed quiet. One evening, my best friend Haley knocked on my door without warning. I almost didn't answer, but she kept knocking until I did. She didn't ask what happened, she saw it on my face. She brought Thai food and her old college hoodie and sat cross-legged on my couch. "Say it," she said softly. "Whatever it is, say it." So I did. I told her everything, every subtle moment I ignored, every time he made me feel like loving me in public was some kind of rebellion. When I said the words out loud, he said I wasn't his type because I'm black. It felt like ripping the splinter out. The wound still burned, but at least I could breathe again. Haley didn't interrupt. She reached over, squeezed my hand and said, "Then he was never your type either." That night, for the first time since it happened, I slept. Not peacefully but honestly. The next morning I called a therapist. It wasn't a decision made out of strength but out of exhaustion. I was tired of carrying pain that wasn't mine to bear. Sitting across from that therapist a week later, I said those same words again and somehow they hurt less. She told me healing isn't forgetting. It's understanding that what they did says more about their limits than your worth. I nodded, though my throat ached from holding back tears. Days turned into weeks. I started writing again, not for an audience but for myself, scribbling in a notebook about the things I still loved. Cinnamon candles, old jazz records, rain tapping the window. I cooked, ran by the harbor, called my mom more often. Every small act felt like reclaiming a piece of the woman I had been before him. Still, every night when I turned off the light, my mind replayed that moment in his car. The way he couldn't look at me. The way easier sounded like a sentence. But then another thought began to take its place, one that scared me at first because it felt like strength. He might have left because of my color, but I'll rise because of it. A month later, on a quiet Friday evening, I found an envelope in my mailbox. Heavy paper. Gold script. His name. And hers. A wedding invitation. For a long moment I just stared at it, fingers trembling. The ink looked smug, as if daring me to stay silent again. I wanted to tear it, burn it, pretend it didn't matter. But deep down something colder and stronger whispered, not this time. I placed the invitation on my table, smoothed the edges, and stared until my reflection blurred in the glossy surface. If he wanted me to see him marry someone his family would understand, then he'd also have to see who I'd become without him. And that night, under the soft hum of city lights, I made a quiet promise to myself. I would not be the woman he pitied. I would be the woman he would never forget. The invitation stayed on my table for days, like an unspoken dare. Every time I passed by it, I felt my chest tighten. The gold lettering gleamed under the light, mocking me with its elegance, its perfect symmetry. Nathan and Claire. Even their names looked like they belonged together in some storybook version of love that I was never meant to be a part of. I couldn't bring myself to touch it, not at first. It sat there, heavy with everything I wanted to forget. I told myself it was just a piece of paper, that it had no power over me, but lies told to yourself are the hardest ones to unlearn. I avoided it the way you avoid looking at an old scar. But every time I came home from work and dropped my keys on the counter, it waited. I'd make dinner, pretend not to see it, then find myself staring at it again, remembering the warmth of Nathan's hand against mine, the way he used to say my name like it was a secret. Now all I could hear was his voice saying, "It's just easier." It echoed in my head, and every time it did, I felt that old ache rise, the one that told me I had been seen and then erased. One evening, Haley came over with a bottle of red wine and 2 glasses. She spotted the invitation almost instantly. "You're not seriously thinking of going, are you?" she asked, her brow furrowing. I shrugged, unsure what to say. "He invited me," I murmured, trying to sound indifferent, but even I could hear the tremor in my voice. Haley sighed. "Of course he did. Men like him love to feel noble after they've broken something. It's their way of pretending they didn't cause the cracks." Her words landed hard because they were true. I wasn't sure if he wanted closure, forgiveness, or to prove to himself that he had done nothing wrong. Maybe all 3. That night I sat in silence long after Haley left. The city outside buzzed with Friday laughter and car horns. I opened the window, letting the cool air wash over me. I thought about how I had rebuilt myself these past months, brick by brick, breath by breath. Therapy had helped me breathe again, work had given me purpose, and writing had stitched parts of me back together. But something about that invitation reminded me that healing isn't always about moving on. Sometimes it's about walking back into the place where you were broken and refusing to stay shattered. I reached for my journal, the one where I poured out the words I couldn't say out loud. I wrote about pain, about dignity, about the way racism hides behind smiles and polite voices. I wrote about the night Nathan said those words and how I felt like my skin had suddenly turned into a reason for rejection instead of the story of my heritage. And somewhere in those pages, between the anger and the exhaustion, I found something unexpected: clarity. I wasn't writing about him anymore. I was writing about me. A few days later, I stopped by a small CAF after work. It was quiet, warm, with soft jazz playing in the background. I ordered my usual black coffee, 2 sugars, and sat near the window. That's when I saw him. Not Nathan. Someone else. A man at the counter arguing gently with the barista about whether adding cinnamon counted as ruining coffee. He was tall, dressed simply, his laughter filling the space without trying. When he caught me smiling at his playful protest, he walked over with an easy grin. "You look like you agree with me," he said. I shook my head. "No, I think you're completely wrong," I replied, and he laughed, the sound soft and disarming. "I'm Daniel," he said, extending his hand. "Brianna," I answered, and for the first time in months, saying my own name didn't feel heavy. We talked until my coffee went cold. About books, music, the absurdity of office life, and the best beaches near Sydney. It wasn't flirtatious in the usual way. It was kind, unhurried, real. He didn't ask where I was from or dance around the topic of race like it was fragile glass. He just listened when I spoke, and when he laughed, it reached his eyes. There was something grounding about him, something that made me feel seen without being studied. When we parted, he said, "I'll see you here again," as if it were a fact, not a question. I went home that night, and for the first time since Nathan, I smiled without guilt. But then I saw the invitation again and my stomach twisted. I picked it up, feeling the weight of it between my fingers. The edges were sharp, almost deliberate. I sat down at the table and stared at it under the dim kitchen light. This time I didn't feel the sting. I felt something else resolve. I wasn't going to go as the woman he left behind. I was going to go as the woman he could never touch again. The next morning, I opened my drawer and took out my favorite pen, the one Haley had given me for my birthday, and circled the RSVP line. My hand didn't tremble. I checked the box marked accepts with pleasure. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was freedom. I sealed the envelope, pressed my thumb against it, and whispered, "Let him see what he lost." As I dropped it into the mailbox, the sound it made, a soft metallic thunk, felt final, like a door closing for good. Walking home, the breeze brushed against my skin, and I realized how long it had been since I felt proud to exist exactly as I was. I didn't need Nathan's validation, his family's approval, or anyone's apology. What I needed was to show up, not for him but for myself. I looked up at the night sky, stars scattered across it like promises. Somewhere deep inside, I knew this wasn't about a wedding anymore. It was about reclaiming the story that had once been stolen from me. And this time I was going to write the ending myself. The day of the wedding crept closer like a shadow stretching across the week. I told myself it was just another event, just another date on the calendar, but deep down I knew it wasn't. It was the day I would walk into a room full of people who looked like the ones who whispered I didn't belong. And it would be the first time Nathan saw the woman he had called different standing tall in the skin he thought was a burden. I wanted everything about that day to speak for me, the way I walked, the way I smiled, the way I refused to look small. I spent hours searching for a dress that didn't just fit my body but carried my story. When I found it, I knew. It was deep emerald green, smooth satin with a neckline that caught the light just right. It wasn't loud. Didn't need to be. It was quiet power, the kind that made people stop talking without knowing why. On the morning of the wedding, I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. My hair coiled softly around my shoulders, my skin glowed against the color of the dress, and for the first time, I didn't pick apart my reflection. I looked like the woman I had fought to become, steady, whole, and finally done apologizing. Haley came over with a grin that tried to hide her nerves. "If confidence were a person, it would look exactly like this," she said, her voice thick with pride. "You sure you want to go?" I met her eyes in the mirror. "I'm not going to him," I said softly. "I'm going for me." When Daniel arrived to pick me up, he paused at the doorway, eyes wide but smiling. "You look." He stopped, shaking his head like words weren't enough. I laughed, nerves loosening just a little. "Say it." He took a step closer. "You look like the truth, Brianna." The words hit me harder than I expected. No one had ever said something like that to me before. And in that moment, I felt a calm that spread from my chest outward. Whatever waited at that wedding, I could face it. The drive to the venue was long and winding, the kind that gives your thoughts too much space to wander. I watched the city fade behind us, replaced by rolling hills and sunlight skipping over the water. Daniel reached across the console and took my hand. "You don't owe him anything," he said quietly. "Not even your anger." I nodded, but part of me knew it wasn't anger that drove me, it was closure. Not the kind he could give, but the kind I could create by walking through that door on my own terms. When we arrived, the venue looked like a scene out of a magazine: white drapes, chandeliers, people dressed like they were auditioning for perfection. My heart pounded, but I straightened my shoulders. I could feel eyes on me the moment I stepped inside. Some recognized me instantly. Others whispered behind polite smiles, curiosity painting their faces. Daniel stayed close, his hand warm at my back, his calmness grounding me. The air smelled like roses and champagne, but beneath it was something colder: class, control, the quiet judgment of people who thought they understood love. And then I saw him. Nathan stood near the altar, laughing with one of his groomsmen. The sight hit me like a memory you thought had faded. His hair was neatly styled, his suit perfectly tailored. For a moment, I could almost remember the man who used to trace circles on my hand when he talked about dreams. But that man didn't exist anymore. This one belonged to a version of the world that had no room for me. When his eyes met mine, time stuttered. His smile faltered just enough for me to see it: the shock, the regret, the disbelief. I didn't look away. I didn't blink. I just held his gaze until he turned back toward the crowd, pretending it hadn't shaken him. It had. I knew it by the way his shoulders stiffened, by the way his bride glanced at him, confused by something she couldn't name. We took our seats and I could feel the stares, the whispers moving through the room like ripples in water. But this time they didn't sting. They just reminded me how far I'd come. When the music started and the bride walked down the aisle, Nathan's face softened, but his eyes flicked toward me again just once, quick and uneasy. And in that moment I didn't feel broken anymore. I felt powerful. Because he could hide behind vows and rings, but he couldn't hide from the truth sitting a few rows back. The truth that I had survived him. After the ceremony, while everyone mingled under strings of lights, Daniel handed me a glass of water, his smile gentle. "You okay?" he asked. I took a deep breath, looking around the glittering crowd. "More than okay," I said. I glanced toward Nathan, who was laughing too loudly now, his laughter edged with something brittle. For the first time I didn't feel small in that world. I felt seen by myself most of all. Later, when the band started playing, Daniel offered his hand. "Dance with me," he asked. I hesitated, then smiled. As we stepped onto the dance floor, I felt every pair of eyes turn again. But I didn't care. The room blurred, and all I saw was Daniel, steady, kind, present. I laughed, and it wasn't to prove anything. It was because joy, real joy, had found me again. As the night drew on, Nathan passed by us once, his eyes meeting mine for half a second. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then stopped. Maybe he wanted to apologize. Maybe he wanted to remember what it felt like to be brave. Either way, I didn't give him the chance. I turned back to Daniel and kept dancing. My story wasn't his anymore. It was mine. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the blinds, soft and golden, and for the first time in months, I didn't wake up with that heavy ache in my chest. The wedding was over, but its echoes lingered. The whispers, the looks, the way Nathan's eyes had widened when he saw me, it all replayed in flashes. Yet none of it hurt the way I thought it would. There had been no grand apology, no cinematic moment of regret. There had only been silence, and somehow that silence said more than any words ever could. Told me he understood now. Maybe not fully, maybe not enough to change who he was, but enough to know he had lost something real. And that was enough for me. I sat on the balcony with a cup of coffee, watching the early commuters rush by below. My phone buzzed with messages. "Haley's proud. You did it." Daniel's gentle, "Hope you slept well." I smiled at both. The world felt different, lighter somehow. I thought about how far I'd come from that night in Nathan's car, the girl who couldn't even look up from her lap while he explained why I wasn't his type. Now I was the woman who had walked into his world and left it brighter. Not because I needed revenge, but because I refused to let shame win. When Daniel arrived that afternoon with 2 sandwiches and that familiar easy smile, I couldn't help but laugh. "You really think food fixes everything, don't you?" He grinned, sitting beside me. "No, but it's a good start." We ate quietly, legs stretched out, the sound of the city blending with the hum of passing trains. After a while he said, "You were incredible yesterday." I shook my head, embarrassed. "I didn't do anything." He tilted his head. "You existed where they never expected you to. That's everything." His words hit me harder than I wanted to admit. I had spent years trying to shrink myself to fit, and now here was a man who saw my existence as power. Later, as we walked along the harbor, I told him something I hadn't said out loud before. When Nathan said I wasn't his type, I started wondering if love had a color. If I'd always be someone's exception instead of their choice. Daniel stopped walking. "Then he never knew what love is," he said simply. "Love doesn't need permission slips from people too afraid to unlearn what they were taught." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw no hesitation, no pity, just truth. My throat tightened. Sometimes healing doesn't announce itself with fireworks, it's just a quiet moment when someone says what you've been waiting your whole life to hear. In the weeks that followed, I found myself laughing more. The walls of my apartment didn't feel like they were closing in anymore. I started volunteering at a youth art center on weekends, helping kids paint stories that reflected who they were. Watching them splash color onto blank canvases reminded me of something my therapist once said: "Healing isn't becoming someone new. It's remembering who you were before the world told you otherwise." I carried those words with me like armor. Nathan's wedding became a story I didn't need to tell. The power wasn't in what he saw that night, it was in what I realized. I had spent so long thinking closure meant confrontation, but now I knew it meant peace. It meant being able to say his name without bitterness. It meant walking past a memory without bleeding. One evening, while scrolling through my emails, I saw a new message. The subject line made my breath catch: Nathan. For a moment I just stared at it. My pulse quickened, not from fear but from curiosity. I opened it. It was short, almost timid. "You looked beautiful. I hope you're happy. I'm sorry." For a few seconds I just sat there reading it again and again. The apology was small but it carried weight. So it wasn't what I needed. I typed back 2 words, I am. Then I hit send. I didn't wait for a reply, didn't expect one. That was the difference now. I wasn't seeking validation. I was confirming peace. That night I called Haley and told her everything. She laughed softly. I knew he'd reach out, she said. Men like him always realize too late that the women they called too much were just too real. Her words made me smile, but not with bitterness, with gratitude. Because she was right. I had been too real for a man still learning how to face himself. As the days passed, I felt the last traces of that old pain begin to fade. It didn't vanish completely. It softened into something else, wisdom maybe. Understanding. I learned that racism doesn't just wound your heart. It tries to rewrite your worth. But when you reclaim that worth, when you wear it like a second skin, it becomes your greatest strength. That evening Daniel and I walked through the park, the sky streaked with pink and gold. Do you ever think about him? He asked gently. Sometimes, I admitted. But not because I miss him. I think about the lesson he left behind. How prejudice wears suits and smiles and sometimes even says, I love you before it breaks your heart. But I also think about how I rose anyway. Daniel nodded, squeezing my hand. You didn't just rise, he said. You soared. As we stood there watching the last light fade, I realized he was right. I had spent months mourning what I lost, but now I could finally see what I gained: a voice that no longer trembled, a peace that didn't depend on anyone's approval, and a love that felt like freedom. Weeks passed, and the weight that had once sat on my chest began to fade into something softer. The pain wasn't gone completely, it never truly goes away, but it had transformed into quiet strength. I could finally walk past places where Nathan and I had shared laughter without feeling my throat tighten. I could scroll through memories without bitterness creeping in. The silence he left behind had once felt like punishment. Now it felt like peace. The world around me hadn't changed, but I had. I no longer needed anyone's permission to feel worthy. I no longer needed to be chosen to feel valuable. I had already chosen myself. It was a Sunday morning when I realized how far I'd come. The sky outside was streaked with soft gray, the kind of morning that made the city seem gentler. Daniel was still asleep, his arm draped lazily over me, his breathing steady. I watched him for a moment, remembering the man who had held me up through quiet gestures, the man who never treated my pain as something to fix but as something to understand. He never made me feel like I had to perform strength to deserve love. With him I could be soft without feeling weak. And that, I realized, was the difference between healing and pretending. Healing lets you rest. Pretending keeps you running. After breakfast we walked down to the local market, the one that always smelled like flowers and baked bread. It wasn't anything special, but it was ours. People smiled as we passed. No stares. No second glances. Just 2 people existing freely. And in that ordinariness I found something extraordinary. For so long I had been defined by how others saw me. By how Nathan's family might whisper behind closed doors. By how the world expected me to shrink so others could stay comfortable. But standing there, sunlight catching my skin, laughter spilling out without effort, I felt like I had stepped out of the frame they had tried to trap me in. Later that day Haley called. So, she said, her voice teasing, how does it feel to be the girl who made her ex question his entire life at his own wedding? I laughed. It's not about him anymore. She paused, then said quietly, I know. But I'm proud of you. You faced something most people would run from. Her words caught me off guard, and for a second my throat tightened. I didn't face him, I said softly. I faced myself. Because that was the truth. The hardest part hadn't been forgiving Nathan, it had been forgiving the part of me that once believed I had to earn love by being less of myself. That evening, as the sky darkened, Daniel and I sat on the balcony with 2 cups of tea. The air smelled faintly of rain. Do you ever think about what you'd say to him if you could go back? He asked. I thought for a long moment, then smiled faintly. I'd tell him thank you. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Thank you. I nodded. Because walking away from me gave me back to myself. He thought leaving me because I'm black would break me, but it built me instead. It showed me who I really am and who I'll never be again. Daniel didn't say anything, he just reached over and took my hand. The kind of silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of understanding. In the days that followed, I began to notice how peace makes its home in the small things, the quiet morning stretches, the laughter shared over burnt toast, the moments when you catch yourself smiling for no reason. I didn't need big moments anymore to feel alive. I had learned that healing isn't about forgetting the hurt. It's about reclaiming your story from it. I wasn't defined by what Nathan couldn't love. I was defined by what I refused to lose: my joy, my grace, my power. Sometimes when I pass by couples holding hands on the street, I still think of that girl in the car who had her heart broken for something she couldn't change. But now I think of her with pride. She didn't know it then, but she was about to bloom. She was about to turn rejection into resilience. And maybe that's the beauty of pain. It strips you down until all that's left is the truth of who you are. A few months later, as I sat on a park bench with my journal open, I wrote the words that felt like an ending and a beginning all at once. He said I wasn't his type because I'm black. But my skin, my voice, my story, they were never flaws. They were my inheritance. I smiled as I wrote it, letting the wind lift the corners of the page. I realized I didn't need to prove anything anymore. Not to Nathan. Not to the world. Not even to myself. The woman who once cried herself to sleep had become the woman who laughed without apology. As the sun set, painting the horizon in shades of amber and rose, Daniel wrapped his arm around me. "You okay?" he asked quietly. I leaned into him, watching the light fade into night. "I'm more than okay," I said. "I'm free." And for the first time I truly was. "Before you go, tell me one thing: have you ever been judged for something you could never change and still found the strength to rise above it?" If Brianna's story touched your heart, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear these words, and subscribe for more stories that remind us how power always returns to those who choose self-worth over silence. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Brianna's place that night?